Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the MyHeritage webinar, Uncover Your Scandinavian Roots. Our webinar team today consists of myself, Emma Datney, the UK and Australia Community Manager, our experts of the evening, Mike Mansfield, the Director of Content Production, and Jason Oler, Senior Program Manager, and our wonderful helper, Amanda Tantasalachai, the social media coordinator at Genie, and she's going to be helping in the back with questions. Just a little bit about MyHeritage if you are new to us. With over 80 million members worldwide and more than 6 billion global historical records, we're the leading destination for families to discover, preserve, and share their family histories together. We offer free family sites where you can build your family tree, connect, and stay in touch with your family. We also offer a free software, Family Tree Builder, which is an easy-to-use family tree editor for your desktop to build a family tree and sync it directly with your online tree. It's now available for both Mac and Windows users. SuperSearch, our online search engine, allows you to search through over 6 billion historical records and a diverse international collection of family trees to make family history discoveries at the touch of a button. This includes millions of Scandinavian records dating back to the early 1600s, as we'll talk about and discuss in a few minutes. With the MyHeritage mobile app, you can edit your family tree, add photos, and preserve your family history in the palm of your hand on the go, anytime, anywhere. Our innovative matching technologies help accelerate your family history research by providing profile matches and historical record matches for your relatives without having to search yourself. Now with instant discoveries, it's even easier for families to explore their past in seconds by signing up to MyHeritage and start making instant discoveries and records in minutes. Just a few tips to get the most out of the webinar. If you have any programs in the background, close them. Turn up your speakers or use headphones. You can open the webinar's control panel and have a pen and paper ready to take any notes for a special gift at the end of the webinar and for any questions you might want to ask. Talking about questions, there's two ways to get our attention to ask questions. You have a question panel where you can type in a question and we'll try and answer it along if Mike and Jason don't cover it throughout their thing. And if anyone wishes to ask a question live, please mention so, and we'd love to have people take questions live at the end as well. You can also raise your hand and to ask a question. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Mike, who will begin giving us a taste of uncovering your Scandinavian roots and tips for learning more about those ancestors.
Great, I'm unmuted now. So this is Mike Mansfield, and my colleague Jason Oler will be talking to you. Excuse me, let me make sure my screen is showing. Apologize. All right, let me start over. I think my screen is now showing. My name is Mike Mansfield. My colleague Jason Oler will be assisting and presenting great information today. It's a very snowy day here in the state of Utah, where we are both based. We're very happy, though, to speak to you today about research in Scandinavia with MyHeritage and other online resources. Let me provide a brief overview of the topics that we'll talk about today. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to Scandinavian/Nordic, including a brief discussion about patronymics and naming customs. I'll also touch briefly on some immigration and immigration issues. And then finally, we'll go deeper into each of the 4 countries that we'll be focusing on today: Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Finland. This is a very big topic, and in college or history departments, a course like this would probably be offered over a semester. We're going to try to shrink this down to less than an hour. So we have a lot of material. We certainly cannot discuss everything that we'd like to, but hope to give you a feel and a taste for the types of materials that are available and give you some pointers to help you have some success in your research. First, an introduction about Scandinavian and Nordic geography. So technically, when we speak about the Scandinavian countries, we, to be precise, should really only think about Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. When we include Finland or Iceland, then we can expand it and include, or be more inclusive with the term Nordic. So sometimes you'll hear genealogists talking about Scandinavian or Nordic. That's the technical definition. Sometimes Scandinavian, at least here in North America, is used more as a synonym for Nordic. We also can include Greenland and the Faroe Islands in with this group. They're related to those countries, and those are both actually independent kingdoms within the Kingdom of Denmark. And finally, the Svalbard Archipelago, independent, well, an area administered by Norway. And then another independent country is Åland, a very small group of islands between Sweden and Finland. I want to spend just a moment talking about a term that you may not have heard about before called anthroponomastics. This is the study of names given to people. So there's actually a whole group of, a whole section of social scientists called onomastics, and this is anthroponomastics, meaning the names given to people. So for the Scandinavian and Nordic countries, it's very important to understand how the patronymic patterns work. If you've done work in this area, you're probably familiar with this, so this will be a very quick refresher. Again, if I'm looking for, a person here, I went very far forward, let me back up. If I'm looking for a person here, Anders Knudsen, his sons, for example, will be given a last name based on the father's first name. Likewise, the daughters will have a different last name, again, but based on the father's first name. So you can see the pattern here. In Norway, from about 1875 to 1900, the patronymic naming patterns began to be replaced with persistent surnames. Unfortunately, there's no official registration of those name changes, and it can be somewhat of a challenge to discover what your ancestors' patronymic may have been, or what their persistent surname turned into. Sweden, a very similar practice. There's difference in how they spell the ending of the name of the word son or daughter. Very similar to Norway. By about 1875, this practice started to end and be replaced with persistent surnames. Again, also in Denmark, very similar pattern. A little earlier in Denmark, the patronymic names began to be replaced with surnames. Unfortunately, like I mentioned before, there is no official registration of those name changes. Generally, as I mentioned here, it did happen primarily first in the cities and then was adopted out in the rural and countryside areas. I'm just going to throw an example from Iceland. Iceland is one of the only few countries that I'm aware of that still uses patronymics today. I think most of the population there still has some type of patronymic surname. And again, the spellings vary a little bit from these Nordic languages to another. Naming customs in Finland. This is actually a pretty deep topic, and I'm going to go very quickly over it. But in Finland, given its history that we'll talk about a little bit later, given names can be recorded in the genealogical records in Swedish, and they can also be in Finnish. It was very common for people to have a Swedish form of their personal name as well as a Finnish form. And a person's name may be used in one record, or a person's Swedish name, for example, might be used in one record and their Finnish name might be used in another. Generally in the church records, which we'll talk about here, I think you'll find a predominance of the Swedish form when those are used. And this practice is more pronounced in the western side of Finland. Here are some common variations, for example. So these are some male given names. For example, if my Swedish given name is Gabriel, I could also be known under the Finnish name of Capo. And some examples of Swedish names. And let me just give a quick note here. Neither myself nor Jason speak any of these languages. We can certainly talk about Japanese and French in more detail of languages that we could converse in, but if we make mistakes on the pronunciation, we ask for your forgiveness in advance. Finally, the patronymics in Finland, given that it's a mix of these Swedish and Finnish names, so you'll also see the same Swedish patronymic pattern, and then a separate patronymic pattern, or actually the very similar pattern but different endings for the Finnish patronymics. As I mentioned at the bottom, patronymics in Finland were used until about 1880 and then started to transition. There are also areas in Finland where patronymics were not really used and people had static surnames for even hundreds of years. There was a law adopted in 1921 that required all Finnish families to actually adopt a fixed surname. Next, I think I have two slides on Nordic immigration. Primarily, these slides focus on immigration to the United States and Canada, but if you're from other localities such as perhaps Australia, similar types of events would have occurred there. Immigration to the United States and Canada from the Nordic countries increased dramatically in the late 19th century. This was due to a number of issues, including economic issues, pushing people out of the country or pulling them to North America, high unemployment, and a lack of new and productive farmland and a growing population that was increasingly difficult for people to find their jobs or farms that they could work. Here in the United States, a Homestead Act of 1862 enabled people to get homesteads here, mostly in the prairie states. And the Norwegians were very enthusiastic in taking that opportunity to come to the United States and Canada and establish homesteads. The Danes also followed suit and came to many of the states in the upper Midwest. And the Swedes, again, very similar to the Danes and Norwegians, the upper Midwest, the prairie provinces, as well up in Canada. And the Finns were a little bit more dispersed. They generally came and worked in anything from mines to lumber mills across mostly the northern part of the United States, from the northeast to the northwest. By 1924 in the United States, immigration laws had changed quite a bit, and after World War I, immigration from these countries was reduced quite heavily from the passage of the Immigration Act of 1924. So although not as numerous as the German or Irish immigrants, Scandinavians arrived in massive numbers. Over 1 million Swedes left Sweden and came to North America from 1868 to 1914. During the 1880s alone, so just during that one decade, each year more than 1% of the entire population of Sweden immigrated to the United States. So in total, by the 1930s, approximately 20% of the Swedish population had left the country for other homes abroad. Approximately 800,000 Norwegians left Norway, and with the exception of Ireland, no country sent a larger percentage of its people to the United States than Norway. 300,000 Danes and 230,000 Finns also immigrated. So now we're ready to jump into some country-specific discussions. Jason Oler will be covering Denmark and Sweden, and then I'll come back and finish up with Norway and Finland. So with that, we're ready to pass the control over to Jason.
Okay, great. I'm going to pass over to Jason right now. Thanks, Mike.
Let me know when you can see me and I'll dig in.
Looks great, Jason. Take it away.
All right. So I'm a little bit of a playful individual and my attention span can be a little short, so I need to start off with just something a little bit fun when I'm talking about Norway. Just to get in on Norway, a few things of note. From our childhood, we read a lot of marvelous stories, and there's a predominant Danish author, Hans Christian Andersen, draws things such as The Little Mermaid, Emperor's New Clothes, The Little Mermaid. Danish men, in case you didn't know it, marry the oldest European women on average. The average woman in Denmark is 32 years old when she gets married. There are 3 separate studies that have gone on around the world, conducted by separate universities, and they all seem to conclude that the Danish people are the happiest people on earth. Denmark happens to provide, they're the 5th largest exporter of food to the world. About 63% of their land area is dedicated to agriculture, which would probably leave 27% dedicated to coffee shops, as far as I understand. And there are 443 named islands in Denmark. 76 of them are inhabited. And then finally, one of my most favorite things that ever came out of Denmark, Lego. I still play with this with my children. They think they're playing with me, but it's really the other way around. So we can understand Denmark, research a little better. I'm going to insult someone by trying to cover Danish history in 60 seconds, but we're going to give it a shot here. Really, Denmark, you started seeing people showing up around 12,000 BC. They went through Stone, Bronze, Iron Ages up until about 500 BC. There were strong ties between the Danish people and the Roman Empire, extending into the 1st and 2nd century AD. And you see some of that in some of the building in art. I'd love to understand. Viking period in Denmark was from about the 8th to 11th century. You saw trade routes going not just from Greenland to Constantinople. I mean, you saw them going over to Newfoundland in North America at this point in time. The Danes were united and Christianized in 965 AD by Harold Bluetooth. One interesting fact, the current Danish royal family has the longest continuous genealogy of royalty of anyone in Europe, and they trace their roots directly back to Harold Bluetooth. 12th century, we saw many Danish civil wars. I apologize, there's just not time to cover all of that, but there were many. Around 1387, Denmark, Sweden, Norway were all united under one crown under Margaret I. But by 1523, Sweden has seceded from this union. There was the Protestant Reformation happened in Denmark and Norway around the mid-1500 to mid-1600 time frame. In 1660, there was the Treaty of Copenhagen, which saw an end to some number of wars and set the boundaries for the Denmark that we recognize today, more or less. And then in 1748 to 1815, somewhere in there, serfdom was abolished. And the majority of those people had the opportunity to become landowners. There was also free and universal education offered to the masses at that time. Oh, and Norway goes from Danish to Swedish rule in 1814. So let's talk about the Denmark rank records right now. So this is an example of a parish record. These images have largely been captured and are available from the, I believe, the late 1600s and at least through the early 1700s on. You can find these, well, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We'll dig in a little bit, but you can find this on the Danish National Archives site. One of the issues with these images are they are bitonal, meaning they're only captured in black and white. There are no shades of gray. It can lead to some hard-to-read images at times, and there is no index for these yet, so you need to be able to understand where your people were in time, and then you can search by place and date. And if you look at this one, this is this is a death record here from 1837. The great thing about these parish records from Denmark, as of 1645, all pastors were required to keep records of the births, marriages, and deaths. Unfortunately, most of the records between 1645, or a large number of the records between 1645 and 1750, have been lost due to fire, mold, mildew, rat, war, etc. To alleviate this, around 1814, the Danish government required all the pastors to create 2 sets of all these registers. This prevented records from being lost through natural disasters or fires or wars, largely. I also like to mention censuses, and we'll talk about these in a little more depth in a minute. This is an example of the 1930 Denmark census. MyHeritage has gone and completely indexed this project or this collection and has it up online right now. You can search by name and locality by date. It's really a pretty collection to have out there. But the national censuses for Denmark are some of the earliest national censuses ever captured and still preserved. They range from 1787 through, I believe they actually go all the way through 1970, but only the censuses through 1930 are available for public viewing at this point. It's also worth noting that there are a couple of regional censuses. For example, the Schleswig-Holstein census from 1803 and from 1835 are also available and can be looked at. These are regions of Germany that were, at that time, under Danish rule. Other record sets that are available, we have probate and court records. They range from 1760, and I believe you can view them through at least 1950 right now. The last 75 years are protected from public viewing. But these, if you're familiar with North American probate records, you might be cringing right now at the thought of using them. They have a lot of information, but they're very difficult to use. The Danish records are the antithesis of this. They are very well kept. They are very well recorded and presented, and are somewhat troublesome to use, and are full of great information on wills and estates, etc. And then finally, it's worth mentioning, and Mike alluded to this a little bit, there are great immigration collections that can be looked at. The immigration collection of note here is the Copenhagen police records of immigrants. This wasn't so much a record of immigrants as it was a police list used to control the number of individuals who were offering immigration to the New World, to North America. There were problems with con men or criminals or shysters, whatever you want to call them, previous to 1868, who would sell passage on fictitious ships to people. The people would show up and the ship wouldn't actually exist, but their money would be gone, or they would sell passage on existing ships where they had no right to actually sell passage. So the police stepped in and started this controlled immigration policy. Some sources of these records, we can go to the Danish National Archives, and I just wanted to take us there for a look and go through a few things here. Let me enlarge this on my screen. So this is the Danish National Archives site. Right now it is in Danish. It's a little difficult for me to read, so one thing you can do, you can go to, if you're using Google Chrome, you can go to the top of your screen and there's a button to translate this page. Or they've done a fine job of making this easy for me to use. The bottom left corner there, you can view this site in English, so we'll do that. Then we're interested in looking at genealogy here, so we'll just click through to that. It's worth noting that the site has done a great job. If you need help on understanding the formation, patronymics of Danish names, there's resources there. There are resources for understanding the handwriting, but we're going to go through and look at how to get started on genealogy here. This is a page that gives you many helpful hints, but you can read that on your own time. We're going to continue through to their online services. So there's three major portals that you can look at through the Danish site here. You have the Archive Layer Online site. You have the DAISY Online, and you have the Danish Demographic Database. The DAISY Online is mostly a way to search the resources found on the Danish National Archives site. You'll get a lot of resources such as books being searched through this portal. The Danish Demographic Database appears to be a partner site. You can go through there. You'll be able to look at land information. You'll be able to look at probates. They have some census leads. I believe they actually have access to a couple of the earliest censuses, 1787, for example, being almost completely indexed and made searchable through there. They have started work on some of the later censuses, but they just seem to have kind of started to catch the first 3 or 4% of those censuses. And then let's go through to the Archive Layer Online page just to take a look here. This one, you no longer get the English translation, so we're going to go up here and do the Google translation. So we're going to look at some church records through here. And we'll start off, we need to translate this page as well. So we'll look at church records and we'll look at them in Bornholm. We will look in the Northern Herald, and let's choose the first parish in line here. Again, this isn't a name searchable index. This is a way of finding the images that your people may be on. So this is taking you to localities through time. And it's actually, it takes a little bit of time for these pages to come up, so I have already downloaded one of these. And it takes you to, it's a Java browser that they have built. On the left, you can scroll through all the separate pages that you may have had on a roll of film, but they've scanned them all in, and it takes you to the actual records themselves. You can see that this is a death record, and you can get the year and you get the names. They've done a great job of presenting content where no content was digitally available before. And then there are other records you can look at through their site as well. You can look through some censuses. The switches are actually the probates, et cetera. They have some other collections you can look at. So that's, I believe, where I'm going to leave you off for Danish research right now. Well, it is actually worth noting there are some other great resources out there. My Danish Roots, they don't have records of their own per se, but they do have some great helps on how to do Danish research on, again, similar to what you find on the Danish National Archives site, how to read some of these documents, how to translate. Great information there. I encourage you to take a look on your time. There are other resources such as familysearch.org. They have some limited collections. I believe there are a few even index collections, but most of the Danish records there are image only. And then MyHeritage is also a resource. So we'll leave off with the 1930 census. This is an example, a look at the 1930 census. It usually came in 2 pages, unless you went off into some of the more rural areas. There were some slightly different form types for the censuses, but majority lines, they look like this. You get the locality, you even get the street number. This first field is sometimes the parish in more rural areas. In the cities, it's often the street name where your people are. And interestingly, they, in the cities, they gave these forms to the householders to fill in. So if you find your people, you'll find that this form is actually filled out by them. So you open up to the next image, and you get their name information. You get locality information, you get gender, birth, you get where they were born, their nationality, etc. It's typical things you find on a census. And then it was announced 2 months ago at the RootsTech conference that we are also working on producing many of the, if not all of the other Danish censuses, and they will be available throughout the next 12 to 18 months. Zoom back out here. All right. I'd like to talk about Sweden for a little while. Looking at the clock, I might need to talk a little fast. I apologize. I'll just try and breathe at the beginning and end and not in between. But really quickly, I'd like to tell you why Sweden is awesome. Those of you from Sweden are probably just nodding your head going, yes, of course it is, but this was my recent find. I listened to National Public Radio here in the States, and they were doing a special on a Twitter account called @Sweden. This is an account that belongs to the country of Sweden, and they've done an interesting social experiment where they give control of this account to one individual within the country each week. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a politician. It may be a sports figure. It may be a baker. It may be a housewife. But you get quite a few people in charge of this. And I love the perspective that the people seem to have about their own country. When Ari Shapiro, who was the radio host, asked the question, he said if there was a tweet saying that Scandinavia were a dysfunctional family, the moderator for @Sweden then spoke up and said, then Sweden would be recognized as the anxious hipster brother, always buying organic coffee and just harassing everybody else. I thought that was a marvelous description for the Swedish people. Okay, we're going to do Swedish history in 60 seconds or less again. Good luck to that. Again, Sweden's been populated for at least 12,000 years. The past, 300 AD, we went through the Stone, Bronze, and Iron Ages. Through 1050, we have the Viking Age. Expeditions for plunder and trade, not just plunder, went up and down the Baltic coast and well into Russia. Around 1000 AD, Sweden really became Sweden. It became a unified country. We mentioned this with Denmark in 1389. Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were all united under one crown, but in 1523 they seceded from that. Actually, it was around 1520-21. They didn't like that 80 plus of their nobles were massacred. Decided, this union is not for us. So Gustav Vasa was elected king, and the church is nationalized at this point. There are continuing wars with Denmark and Finland, and at this point in time, 1560 to 1700, parts of Germany and Poland and Russia and Lithuania all belonged to Sweden. But around 1721, the combined powers of Denmark, Poland, and Russia teamed up to reduce the Swedish territory down to essentially what we know as Sweden and Finland at this point. In 1809, Sweden surrendered Finland to Russia. So previous to 1809, you may find Finnish records mixed in with the Swedish records. Also explains why you'll find a lot of Swedish language leaning over into Finland. And then as part of this trade, Norway was given into Swedish territory when Finland was reduced or removed. And it's worth noting that in 1905, Norway was removed and became its own autonomous country. So Swedish geographical divisions, so that we can understand some of the records. Some of the administrative divisions or provinces, these are not widely used anymore, at least officially, but you can find mention of the provinces through many records. They were traditionally understood and recognized. The provinces were also divided up into larger areas. The northern ones were Norrland or Svealand or Gotland. Currently, the country is divided up into 21 different counties, and within those counties, or land, there are many municipalities. Around 1930, there were upward of 2,500 municipalities. By 1952, there was only 816. Today, there are only 290 municipalities, and I understand that there is legislation to even further reduce that number. And then below the municipality level, you will have parishes, which are still recognized, and there are 2,512 of those, or there were at the time that this presentation was organized. So Swedish records, the Swedish marriage and death records are really quite beautiful. The Swedes have done a marvelous job with their record keeping. So this is the example of a birth and a death record from 1751 and 1754 respectively. They're beautifully kept records. These ones are captured by archivedigital.net. They are a partner of ours who have gone deep into many, many archives all across the country. Sweden has done a marvelous job of capturing these images. They're done in full color, beautifully, pristinely done. So you can view the birth, marriage, and death records on the archivedigital.net site right now. Here's a more modern version of the same. This would be a birth record from 1910. And again, these are not indexed. They are not name searchable yet. Right now, your only resource is to understand about where your people were in Sweden at this time and when, and then you can do image searches, looking through numerous books to find your people. Let me zoom out on that. FamilySearch.org also has some Swedish records. These are, again, births on the left and deaths on the right. They have some small number indexed, but most of the images they have, they don't have a complete collection, but most of the images they have are image browse only. Again, you'll have to know where and when your people were, or have good guesstimations, then you'll be searching through images to find your people. The Swedish National Archives also has several collections that are image only that you can search. So I'd like to spend probably the rest of my time here talking about the Swedish household examination books. The church said we will start doing these in 1684, and really it was widely spread by the early 1700s. Every parish did these books, and they were actually done up until 1991. It's worth noting that around 1695, These household examination books, which were actually examinations of the parish priests of each household's knowledge of the catechism, around 1895, it turned into more of just as national census taking. It was no longer so much a measure of their knowledge of the catechism. But you can follow your individuals, your families, through these collections through time and space. And I'm a bit of a geek. I enjoy some of these movies. And I say time and space, and this image comes to me. But really, you can follow individuals very well, and I'll show you how in just a minute. But these records were formally updated by the parish priest every year. Every year, the priest would go into the home, test each individual's knowledge of the catechism, write kind of a pass-fail grade, and then they would also do informal updates throughout the year as births, marriages, or deaths happen to the individuals within the family within that parish. And when you use these records properly, you really can continue to follow your individuals. And these images, you can find, I believe, almost the complete collection up on archivedigital.net. They are image only right now. You can only browse them, again, by time and place. Or you can go to myheritage.com, where we have so far, and we're hoping to continue this endeavor, so far we have the 1880 through 1920 records all completely indexed, along with the images. Half that collection is up right now. The latter half of the collection will be up within the next 30 to 60 days. So, I'm going to take you to our site rather than try and do PowerPoint here on this one. So this is the MyHeritage homepage. I'm going to go over here to the Research tab. I'm just going to search all records. And then we'll go down to Nordic censuses. Now again, strictly speaking, the Swedish household examinations were not a census, at least in the beginning. In the beginning, they were a measure of the knowledge of the catechism, the church, that the church conducted, but the government from 1895 on uses this as their de facto census. So we're going to click on the Swedish household examination records, and then I'm just going to go right to the advanced search. I want to fill in a couple fields. We're looking for someone in particular. So we're going to look for Anders Gustav Anderson. And he was born on the 14th of February, which is Valentine's Day, in 1833. And that's all the information I'm going to put in on him. I have his birth date and his name. So we'll do a search. So you get numerous hits for Anders Gustav Anderson right up front. And it's worth noting, I've done my research on these. All of these hits are for the same person. You're seeing this gentleman in this first book from 1884 to 1894. The second book is 1895 to 1906. But I want to go down. We're going to look at this one for 1870 through 1882 to look at Anders' family. So the first thing you see, you get his name at the top of the page. This is the home page where we put the record data that we have indexed. You see his residence. If you hover over this little blue icon, you'll get a pop-up on Google Earth where he existed at that time. It's kind of neat to see that. You get all the sourcing information for the book, where the records came from, even down to the line on the page. And then you go to the bottom of the page, and you see his family structure. And it's worth noting that Anders appears to have 2 wives. This isn't a typo, and he's not actually a polygamist or a bigamist. So let's understand what happened here. We're going to just look at the full image. So this is Anders Gustav Anderson. And he has his wife that has been crossed out here, Stina Jonsdottir. Anders was born in 1833 on February 14th, so we're fairly certain it's the right individual. And he and his wife, who was born in 1835, were married in 1862 on December 6th. It also notes that he became single in 1874. And we can confirm that when we see that this column that is kind of folded into the crease of the page. It's more visible on other pages. It says "Dote" or "Death." we see that Stina Jonsdottir died in 1874. Fortuitously, this next woman, Katarina Andersdottir, moved into the community in 1874, and Anders remarried to Katarina Andersdottir in 1874 on November, I believe that is 28th. So as you continue to look at this page, you see that their entire family is crossed out. So this means one of two things. It means the individual has died, or it means they have moved. So this is, let's continue to research this, and I'd like to show you what I mean by you can follow your family through time and space here. They're crossed out, but there's only one entry in that column. So it doesn't appear that they died. So we keep going over here to the right, and we see that they moved in 1878. This is the year for moving. And they moved to page 302 in this book. So let's jump through time and space here. I'm going to go to page 302. And we're going to pick up where we left off. We get to Anders Gustav Andersson again, same birthday, and we see Katarina Andersdottir, so we know it's the same person. It appears there's been another unfortunate event, and if we follow this over, it appears that his second wife died not too long after they were married, for about 4 years after they were married, in 1878 on September 4th. And if you look through the family, you see that they had a son, Johann Fritz, born on August 30th of 1878, 5 days before mother died. It makes you believe that she possibly died due to complications of childbirth, or that happened during childbirth. But Anders Gustav Andersson is a very lucky man and remarries. I believe this is Christina Olofsdottir. She and he are married on the 25th of October in 1879. She moves in to the household in November, a few weeks later in 1879, and their family continues on. One other note, you can continue to find the family moving on through the next series of books. This book, if you look at the years here on the right, where they kept track of the catechism, or knowledge of the catechism, this book only goes up through 1882. So if you wanted to continue to find this family, you would find the village they are in, which is listed here on the left, the home, and you look for the next set of years and you can find these individuals. Or you see that Anna Christina, one of Anders' daughters, has been crossed out, but she has not died. She's just moved out. And you can continue to find her actually within the same book. I believe it's on page 92 there. So these are the Swedish household examination books, or the catechism books. They are a marvelous, marvelous resource. Currently, again, you can find 1880 through 1920 on the MyHeritage site, or you can find the image collections on sites such as archivedigital.com, or you can find them, I believe, some on familysearch.org as well. And that's all I have for this right now. I'd like to turn the time back over to Mike so we can hear a little bit about Norway.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm going to change it back to Mike right now. Very informative and great tips. Mike, you should now be able to share your screen. You just might need to go off mute and you're ready to go. Mike, I think we need, I think the sound, we need, now it should work.
Okay, and I think you're seeing the wrong part of my screen here, is that right? Can you see my main deck, Emma?
Yes, we can see church records. Yeah.
Is that right? We're working right? Sorry, let me back up just a moment. Sorry about the difficulty here. All right. I'll give a very, very short discussion about Norwegian history. Until 1814, the kingdoms of Denmark and Norway were united. Until 1905, and then from 1814 to 1905, the United Kingdoms of Sweden and Norway. So Norway is allying itself with its neighbors in different ways. Sorry, I see that my deck is not showing the right slide. Let me try it this way. Apologize about the difficulty here. Wow. Still trying to get the right slide, the right screen to show. There we go. All right. I was just mentioning about some history. I won't go over that again. But basically, Norway is allying itself with its neighbors in different ways. Most Norwegians were registered at baptism as members of the Norwegian Church. It was the official state church until 2012, and it's an evangelical Lutheran orientation. Since 1845, however, Norwegians have been able to legally withdraw from the state church and join another or no church. However, still today, about 90% of the Norwegian population retain official membership. When we look at the genealogical records from Norway, we often think about records in tiers. The top tier for Norway is church, or the parish registers, the census materials, and then the second and third tier would include things like land and probate, immigration, and cemetery. We only have time in this few minutes we have with you today to show some examples of some census records from Norway. So the National Archives of Norway has been working with a number of its regional archives and some universities in Norway to bring to its website a number of census records. Some of these are indexed, some of them are not. So I want to show you just a brief example of one of my ancestors, Andreas Petter Andreasen. He was born in 1834 in Tromsø, and in 1884 he immigrated to the United States. Tromsø is way, way up north, way above the Arctic Circle. I'm going to next switch over to a browser and show you here on the National Archives website. You'll find this great page where they have many sources listed, and you'll see here in their censuses they list censuses. You need to be careful in that some of these, for example, like the 1875 census, is an incomplete index. Others are complete, so I'm going to look at the 1865 census. I'm going to type in the name of my ancestor here, Andreasen, if I could spell it correctly. I do know that he was born in Troms, and he was born in 1834. We'll go ahead and do a search. So what this site is providing me is an index to the census records. Unfortunately, they haven't linked the index to the images. This is a very rich index, though, and we can see my ancestor here, Andreas Andreasen. He's listed with a number of individuals, including his wife, a child, a son, a father, and some other lodgers that are in the house. This is an example of the type of census materials that you can find on the National Archives of Norway site. I encourage you, if you have Norwegian ancestors, to certainly come to this website, look at the other materials that they have here. Again, as we saw in Jason's talk, many of the materials are not yet indexed, and you often need to do a lot of image browsing where you're knowing information about where your ancestors are from, and then you're reading through page by page. Jumping back to my slide deck here, just a brief note about church records. The parish registers are like very common in Europe, are broken up by births, christenings. You'll also find some confirmations based on the parish, marriages, and deaths and burials. I'm going to spend just a moment talking about Finland. Our time is short. From the medieval times until 1809, it was under Swedish rule. And then from 1809 to 1917, it was associated with the Russian Empire. Basically, they had an off and on relationship with the Russian Empire. However, by the end of World War I, after about 20 years of attempted Russification, they were growing weary of, or many of the population were growing weary of being associated with the Russian Empire. And there was a civil war in 1918, and since then it's been the Republic of Finland. Similarly to other countries, like I mentioned about Norway, most of the population were official members of the state church. Again, in this case, it's an Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland. By the end of 2013, even 3/4 of the Finns were still members of that church. It's the National Church of Finland. Language. So in Finland, Finnish and Swedish are the official languages. Church records were widely kept in Swedish until the 1800s. And the reason why knowing about the church is so important is when we look at the top tier of records for Finland, it really is all about the church records. The Lutheran Church there in Finland did a wonderful job of collecting information about the membership and recording that information that we as genealogists can use today. The second tier, there are some other censuses and tax lists, as well as immigration and other forms of records. But primarily church is where you'll be spending most of your research efforts. There's a wonderful website that if we had time, I'd love to show you more in depth, but it's HISKI. If you Google for HISKI, you'll easily find this. This is a website produced by the Genealogical Society of Finland. They have a nice index of these history books or these parish registers. However, the database or index is not perfectly complete, and you'll find coverage tables on that website that will help you know if your parish or area has been indexed. And new parishes are being added as they become available. And like I mentioned, the index status or transcription status is available online. This is an example of the type of information you can find on HISKI. In this case, I searched for a person in a particular parish whose name was Johan Thornbolm. I'm actually doing this looking for the father because it provides me a very nice interface where I can see the children born to this father. If we do some additional research, we eventually can find the parish registers that are linked to from HISKI, and these are those 4 children that were listed born to, in this case, Johan Carlson and his wife Cassia Lisa, Samuel's daughter. And this is an example from the same HISKI website of their marriage record. So again, wonderful information available. It's not complete, but it's a great resource that you should definitely look to if you have ancestors in Finland. I want to talk for just a moment about other types of church records in Finland. And the one I want to talk to you here in the last few minutes is what we call the main and confirmation books. These are also called the communion books or the clerical surveys or the household examinations. These have names. This collection has a lot of different names based on how it's translated and represented. It has a Finnish name as well as a Swedish name, but it's all the same thing. It's talking about these, what I like to call the main and confirmation books. These communion books are very well digitized and published on the National Archives Service of Finland's website. And going to that website, you'll find, you will not find a robust searchable index, but you will be able to browse for individuals. So using the information that I discovered from HISKI, I was able to locate the spouse of that couple that I showed you earlier, Cassia Lisa, Samuel's daughter, and her family is listed above her. Similarly, for the man in that family, or the groom, Johan Carlson Thornbolm, and his parents. And you'll notice that these records are very similar in structure to the Swedish household examination books that Jason talked about. This is certainly a practice that was adopted by the Finns when they were allied with Sweden and the similar Lutheran church organization that they had. And then here's a record from these same records of this couple. And one question that may arise is, where are their children? We know that they have at least 4 children. And so a supplemental collection to these main and confirmation books are called the children's books. And the practice differed in Finland, from Sweden, where the children were recorded separately from the parents in these children's books until they were confirmed. And these also have different names in both Finnish and Swedish. Most confirmations occurred at around age 15. And these records should not be overlooked because you can find some wonderful information. So here's an example of this family, the same couple, Johan Carl Thornbolm and Cassia Lucia. And what we see here is a really interesting case where many of their children are passing away very early in life. And so of their children, you see that only 4 of them in this register lived past, or one was able to live long enough to be confirmed, and 2 others also survived, at least to this period in the register. So again, if you had not looked at this book, you would miss out on all these other children that this couple had and unfortunately lost prematurely. Just final comment about the main and confirmation books. These records, along with the children books, are an important source that allows us to discover information about our families. And we're very happy to announce that we are engaged in a project with the National Archives of Finland to index these records, these main and confirmation books and the children books, and make these widely accessible for the first time. This is a project that we're currently engaged in, and we expect some initial publications to occur later this year. And if you have Finnish ancestors, you definitely want to keep your eyes open for more information from us about this forthcoming collection. Thank you. That's the end of the talk that Jason and I have, and we'll pass it back to the moderator for some Q&A if we have any time for that.
Thanks so much, Mike, and thanks so much, Jason, again for all your great words and tips and research tips. That was very useful, and also how to navigate through a lot of the records, talking about some of the records. We definitely have some questions in the back, some live, some I'll just answer. So just to remind you, if anyone wants to ask any questions, feel free to put your little hand up or write the question for us, and we'll be able to answer. Just to let everyone know, we'll be posting a copy of the webinar live on our blog shortly after in the coming days. So everyone will be able to view the webinar again. And as a thank you for everyone who has attended, we're offering a 30% discount on MyHeritage data subscription, so you can go through all those records, especially all the new collections and exciting new collections that will hopefully be added soon, as Mike just mentioned, specifically with Finland. So take advantage of that. It's amazing, and that will be valid until April 30th, the end of the month, using the code Scandinavia15. I'll leave it up for another moment so you can write it down. But once again, like I said, we'll be posting a copy and sending an email out afterwards, so you'll be able to get the code again. Now I'm going to pass it on to questions. I'm going to unmute Jason and Mike so that both of them can answer. I know we have quite a lot of questions right now, already starting. I know that there was Janet had wanted to ask a question before. I'm going to just take Janet off mute. Hello, Janet? Janet? Janet Bagat? Let's try again. If not, I can ask her question for her. Janet?
Apparently Janet's intimidated by Mike, but don't worry, I am.
Well, the question is about Norway. She asked, would Norwegians have come through Canada to Wisconsin in 1860?
Yeah, certainly. The Homestead Act that I mentioned was a big draw for Norwegians as well as other Scandinavians, and I don't think it mattered if they maybe had first settled in Canada. The Homestead Act here in the United States was really open to all immigrants. So yeah, they could easily have maybe migrated initially to Ontario, one of the prairie provinces, and then decided to move a little farther south to enjoy the warmer weather.
And a source of those records, and you can often find them enumerating on the border crossing records that you can find in many of the larger sites. In fact, you can find it on ours in the not too distant future as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Jason's referring to a nice collection of border crossing records that we have coming. Yeah, and you'll also want to try to, if you know where the individual or family is in Canada, get as much information about them there in wherever they may be, what religion they were, other vital records you can find. That is quite early for vital records in Canada. But yeah, they could certainly have then migrated to the United States.
Great. We also have a question from Scott live. Scott? Scott?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. So there was a strong migration from Sweden into Finland, specifically to the western part of Finland. Were there any records that were kept about that migration and who might have migrated and such?
Yeah, so you're certainly right that western part of Finland has a lot of Swedish influence. Even today, you'll find communities in the western part of Finland who, Swedish is the community language. I would look still primarily at these church records. The church was recording individuals moving in, whether they were coming from other parts of Finland or Sweden. I don't know of early immigration lists that may exist, but there are lots of materials there on the Finnish National Archives. I don't pretend to be an expert on all of them. I certainly encourage you to look a little further into what they may have in that regard. Records are very excellent, and I think also encourage you to look at those.
Another question. Curio Adit Pirko, I hope I pronounced your name right, asked for me to ask this for him. The question is, I understand that last names were changed in the early 1900s. How do I find what a person's former name was?
So, I think if I understand the question right, they're saying that their family has taken what I call a static surname, and they're unsure what the previous ancestors, what surname they may have used. What you'd want to do is try to find, so in genealogy we always want to work from the known to the unknown. Try to find the earliest possible record you can where an individual in the family is using that new static surname, and look at what other people in their family may be using for their names. Try to get any clues that you can that can help you find or predict what their patronymic surname may have been. You may need to look at these church records or other vital records to build some cases of different families that would match based on their given names. Right, so look at the whole family as a unit and try to find a match on more of them that can give you some evidence about what that prior patronymic name may have been. I guess is my suggestion.
Another question from Jill that I see right now says, will having the name of a town in Sweden, or I guess in any of the countries, and birth date be enough to find family records? Will the name of the town and the birth date be enough?
So yes, and you're opening yourself up to a lot of work, but yes, having the date and the town will allow you to get to the set of books that your individual is in, especially if you know about when they lived. So if you were to go to our site, or if you go to the Archive Digital site, you can type in the town name, or the parish name would actually be much more helpful. Maybe do a little research on Google to figure out which parish your town is within. And then you can search, depending on the size, you may have just a few books to look through. Sometimes there's numerous volumes if it's a large community. The best you can do is hone in on the area in time and start your research there, narrowing the scope. If you're lucky, you find it in the first book. If not, sit down, have a nice cup of something warm to drink, and peruse some books for a couple hours, and you'll find your people.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Jason said, knowing information about the locality of where your ancestor is, until, we're still several years away until we have widely built indexes for some of these countries. And browsing the images that are available online, it can be a bit tedious, as Jason referenced, but it still is very rewarding after even hours of looking through images to find your family. So don't be afraid of it. It's actually quite enjoyable. At least I find it to be.
We have another question about actually emigration within Scandinavia itself, between this specifically from McGill, talking about how can to find out information about moving from Sweden to Denmark.
Jason, do you want to fill that one?
I'm trying to think of a good answer. We don't have any collections specifically that speak to that, and I've actually done a little bit of work looking to see if there were inter-country immigration or emigration lists. I haven't been able to find any. Really, I think it comes down to trying to find that earliest record of when they came into the country. Specific to Sweden and Finland, it's a little easier sometimes with these church books because there was a field on them that asked, on the censuses in Denmark. There was a field that asked their country of nationality, so you can see where they came from. But I hate to give a negative answer. I don't know of any specific immigration lists. It's just finding the earliest record of your individual and the sources that you have at hand. For example, the census.
Yeah, and I would add that there is one. So Jason has mentioned in his talk, they're actually a partner of ours. Their name is Archive Digital. They're a Swedish company that's very active in helping to preserve these records. They have an image collection of a Swedish immigration manifest. I don't know exactly how far back in time it goes, but I would encourage you to look at archivedigital.net and look at their immigration collection. You may find that it's covering the time period that you're looking for. However, it wasn't common for really any country to keep very good records about immigrants leaving or even coming until the mid-1800s. If you're prior to that, then immigration records are virtually non-existent.
Okay, we have another question live from Denise.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Hi. I was wondering, my ancestors came from Stavanger, Norway, and I know here we have multiple parishes, especially in larger locations. How do you find out which parish your ancestors belong to?
Sure, that's a great question. So to locate the parish, if you have any information about where an ancestor may have been buried, that's often a very good indication of obviously where they were living when they died.
Yeah. Not unless I can find a death record for them. I can find my great-grandfather that came here, but he was buried here.
Okay. Do you have any information about where any of these Norwegian ancestors were married?
My great-grandfather and his wife were actually married in Norway.
So if you had information about that place, it's very common that the marriage would have occurred most frequently in the parish of the bride, so the parish that the woman was living in.
Okay, they were both from Stavanger.
Okay.
So I guess my question is, how many parishes were there in Stavanger about 1860?
It would take I don't have those memorized off the top of my head, but you should be able to find out that information. I know of some maps available, for example, on the National Archives website that give information about the parishes that were extant at certain times. Obviously, just like yeah. So I don't know if you want to drop the moderator a email. I would certainly try to send you some information offline.
That would be great, because I have no clue how to find that which parish that belongs to.
There's actually also another resource on the FamilySearch.org site. They have a wiki that I believe lists all the parishes with each of the cities or villages that were involved in each parish.
Excellent, Jason. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. We've actually used that as giving us some information about the parishes. And so we can also send you that link as well, and I think that would be something that would be helpful.
Great. I really appreciate it, because it's been driving me crazy for years.
Yeah, until you find that parish, it can be a bit challenging, so. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Good luck to you.
No problem.
We have another question live from Charles. Charles, can you hear? Charles? Charles? Not sure. In case it's not working, he asked, why did some Norwegians change their surnames when they came to, when they immigrated?
Yeah, that's a great question. It happened not only to Norwegians, but many immigrants as they were coming to the United States. From the articles and studies that I've read, obviously I think many of us heard that, well, first of all, the immigration officer at Ellis Island or somewhere may have inadvertently misrepresented their name. And I'm sure that happened. I do think on many cases that they were looking for a fresh start. And again, as we saw in the patronymic naming practices there in Norway or these other countries, that surnames were sort of a cultural thing that had happened. And then by the late 1800s, there started to be this change that you could pick a surname of almost anything that you wanted. It could have been a surname based on your occupation. It could have been a surname based on the town that you live by. It could have been any number of things. And so it feels like that culturally people were thinking, rightly so, that they were allowed to pick their surname. And they were doing that back in the old country as well as when they came. It's kind of the feeling that I've come to understand.
Great. We have another question live, which I hope will work, and then we'll take one or two more questions, and I think we'll wrap it up. Deborah Knox?
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. I had a question about entering the information in your tree software when you have people, especially from Norway, who use farm names as identification. What name do you choose to go in the tree software?
Sure, that's a great question. And in Norway and many of these Nordic countries, if you know the name of the farm, you certainly want to record that. It can be very helpful not only to yourself as you come back to this family maybe years later, but to other people in your family or other researchers that will be using your work. So I would recommend that you look at the farm name as the lowest jurisdictional level, and then follow that by the parish and other levels as you go up, such as the municipality and the county.
Would you make it part of their name?
Part of the person's name or part of the place name?
Part of the person's name.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly...
Because otherwise you have 15 Oles with the same father's name.
Yeah, and that is one of the challenges that we have in Nordic genealogy is disambiguating, these very common given names and common patronymic surnames. I have seen the practice where a farm name might be put in quotes, like as a type of an alias. I can't really say that I've seen a standard practice per se, but I would suggest that if it works for you and your research goals, there isn't one right way to do it. And so, yeah, definitely keep it. And if it helps you or the people that you're working with, that's the best thing to do.
Can I just say consistency?
Thank
Sorry,
you.
what, Jason?
Yeah, just keep it consistent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for asking.
I would say that we'll just take maybe, there's a few questions that people have been asking about searching either for military or Viking relatives, ancestors. So maybe if you can mention something on searching either Danish military or other Vikings, or there's been from all the different countries, but I've been trying to put it into one question.
So the Danish National Archives has some number of military collections that are searchable. Again, you're going to need to know where your person was and when they were, because they aren't name searchable, but they have those collections up. And for Sweden, there are several military collections up on the archivehistory.net site. They've done a great job, but again, you need to know when and where your people were, and you can browse through time and place to find those. As for the Viking records, I have not, seeing how that time frame was, 11 to 1200 on the outside, I haven't seen any records that survived that time period that weren't chiseled in stone, so I don't know that we have any resources to help that out.
Yeah, basically when you get into the medieval time periods, there are very, very few records, for any locality, and if they exist, you're almost always looking at some type of royalty lineage, which in and of themselves can sometimes be quite questionable.
Thanks. And I think I'll just have two quick more questions from people that don't have mics. One's from Judy about finding sources for meanings of the surname. So is there a source, she asked specifically for Swedish names, but when you're researching, if there's a source for meanings, if there's a place that you can find the meanings of the surname.
Yeah, that's a great topic and something that's sort of near and dear to my heart. I've done that for other localities that I work in, especially in England and Wales. I would be happy to take that question offline and see if I can find some. Usually there's some books that with some research you can discover that can give you some information about some of those surnames and what their origin meanings are based on the locality, right? So a Swedish name dictionary, for example, is what we'd want to look for, or whatever their locality is. So I would encourage that person who posed that question to try to get that to the moderator, and she can forward it to me. Would that work?
Yes, I'll mention in a few minutes to send us any other further questions. And I guess the last question that people have asked, I know we're getting a lot more questions, but there's only so much time we have. People are asking about the best way to find out about people arriving to the States and Canada from Sweden. And Sweden specifically were these questions, but I'm sure it could be relevant for the other countries. And someone mentioned arriving in 1858, just general ship passenger records, going to the U.S. and going to Canada.
Do you want me to take that one, Jason? Do you want to go?
Well, I'll start, and then you can piggyback off that. So, I believe FamilySearch.org. I believe that the LAC, the Library and Archives Canada site, have some of those Canadian passenger lists available. There was quite a few passengers who came in through Halifax or continued downstream down the St. Lawrence and debarked in Quebec, or may have even gone through the Great Lakes. And you may see them coming as far west as Thunder Bay, Ontario. But those records do exist. I don't believe that they exist into the early part of the 1800s, but you see them starting to be well kept in the mid-1800s. There are some transcriptions of those records available on like the Family Search site or a couple of the other larger genealogy organizations. You can also find those people, if they didn't originate, if they ended up in Canada or they started in Canada, you might find them on the border crossing records, which we previously mentioned. They're a great source of information as well. Mike, any other hints?
Sure, yeah, so I'll dovetail on that. One strategy that I like to use is find your Nordic or Scandinavian ancestor in, I think it's the 1910 or 1900 U.S. federal census. One of the questions on that form is the year that they immigrated. And so if you can find the immigration year, then that gives you obviously a great boost in being able to narrow your search down. I'm sorry, but I think this question, now that I remember, was about people coming as early as 1850. Passenger list records, U.S. or Canada, that early are very spotty and limited in the information that they contain. Ellis Island, the big immigration port in New York Harbor, only opened in 1892. Prior to 1892, ships were taken to an immigration station called Castle Garden, and records do exist for that Castle Garden period, and they go back a couple decades, but 1850 is very early. Records do exist, but they are somewhat terse in what they contain, and they can be challenging to have success with. So don't mean to be a bearer of bad news. There are some chances that you'll be able to find some information if they did come to the port of New York. There's other ports along the eastern seaboard that have records, some going back towards that mid-1800 time frame, but they can be quite hard to find, or just there's not many of them that exist.
Great. I think we're going to end that with question. I know I'm sorry to have to end it. There's a lot of questions coming in, and as I said, that we'll be able to email your questions to us. You can get into contact and get updates on MyHeritage. We'll be posting a copy of the webinar live on our blog in the coming days. Blog.myheritage.com. You can follow us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/myheritage, and on Twitter @myheritage.com, where we also post updates, and we'll be just general news on MyHeritage, and also for this webinar we'll be posting that live. Thank you again to Mike and Jason for their wonderful presentation and their advice and their research tips and tools for uncovering your Scandinavian ancestors and helping you navigate through these records. We'd and also be happy to hear any of your questions. You can email support@myheritage.com with any technical questions, and webinars@myheritage.com for any suggestions for future webinars or any questions specifically from the webinar of today. And once again, thank you so much for Jason and Mike for their time and the great presentation and for the questions. Sorry we couldn't answer everything. And thank you again to Amanda for being so helpful with the questions in the back. And we hope to see you at future webinars. Have a good rest of the day or evening.
Thank you much. Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good luck.